Thanks to everybody who's joined us this afternoon. Today we're going to be talking about the entrepreneurial mindset that visionary leaders really need. Enterprise is more than just about becoming an entrepreneur. It's a quality that gives you a positive outlook, an ability to see the glass as half full, and a valuable attribute for whole life, not just at work. So somebody, a special individual who combines the practical and the theoretical. It's my pleasure to introduce Noreen Jaffa Khan, founder and owner of Fate Lounge. So as well as running a successful business, which she manages all aspects of, Noreen also is able to pass on her knowledge and expertise, lecturing at a variety of colleges and universities in around London, where she specialises in human resource management. So thank you to Noreen for joining us today, and over to you.
Thank you very much, Kate. That's a great introduction. So, just to introduce the dimensions of leadership, as you guys obviously are aware, the Institute of Leadership and Management have 5 dimensions, as you obviously can see. So throughout the 49 webinars, it's focused on a variant of dimensions and obviously gone into them in great detail. So for us, we'll be focusing on vision. That's the set of seminars that we focused on today. And more importantly, looking at all these different aspects, as you can see here, what vision encompasses or what it is to be a visionary. So everything from innovating, evaluating your risk, creativity, inspiring, leading change, future readiness, and developing strategy. And finally, enterprise, which is what I personally am going to discuss with you guys today. So enterprise is a great term. And what does enterprise mean? We can look at it from a few different aspects. One aspect could be as a business itself, or the other side, which is a bit more personified as to what it is to be enterprising, which is slightly different. So when we look at enterprise, we are putting together a few different things, such as entrepreneurs and visionary leaders. They all encompass towards the same thing. And I'll explain why. So when we look at the idea of what it is to be visionary and a visionary leader, we are talking about people who are thinking way ahead of their time, thinking about the world with very different viewpoints to what we currently see them in. These are people who are looking at the world with a real paradigm shift in terms of changing what is currently seen as the norm and normality. If you think about now how we purchase goods and services, we purchase them in ways that we never thought was possible, virtually, online. We pay online. We have now things called cryptocurrency. This is a very different world to what was around not even 12 years ago. And that's because people had a vision of how they were going to see the world, and they were going to see it very differently to what we currently see it now. So, what is enterprise? Enterprise is considered by most economists to be an essential factor of production. It requires an ability to create value from managing the other factors of production, land, labour, capital, and the ability to take calculated risks in undertaking an initiative that creates that value. So for me, when I look at that, there are 2 real key words there, initiative and risk. So when you do further research on what it is to be enterprising, those 2 words are what will come up the most, and it's because initiative and risk actually equal entrepreneurship. And I'll explain why. Depending on what your risk factor is as a person will determine whether you're willing to take the plunge to do the things that other people haven't done. If you think about some of the greats, you can look at people like Alexander the Great, for example, who saw things differently. If you look at even people like Abraham Lincoln, they had a vision of doing things differently, but the risk associated with that was absolutely immense, to the point where, historians thought these people were crazy. Okay, they were saying things and they were viewing the world in a way that was seen as absolutely bizarre. And quite often in their own time, they're not actually seen as particularly that great. It's only when we look back at them that we realize how great they were. And it's because of their ability to take the risk. True entrepreneurs are massive risk takers. And that's because they're willing to throw it all in because they have pure faith in what it is that they want to do. The other side is initiative, and initiative is just as important because I've come across many people who have the greatest ideas, some of the most phenomenal ideas, but they don't have the initiative to do anything about it. So they're great idea makers, but the initiative isn't there to push forth and do something about it. So initiative is really, really important. And as I mentioned, put them together, initiative plus risk gives you this element of entrepreneurship. And that is the ability to go out and create something for yourself. So we're just going to look briefly at the continuum of enterprise. So you can see here we've got 5 elements: necessity, conventional, creative, opportunist, and serial. So we look at the first one then. Circumstances reluctantly thrust into self-employment, perhaps briefly, preference for employment. So you've got kind of two things going on there. So the reluctance to thrust into self-employment. So this leads to what we're going to talk about in a second, which is entrepreneurship. So we've just touched on this idea of risk and what risk and risk factors are. And actually, if you're somebody who doesn't want to work for themselves because there is a fear associated with that, you have a preference towards being employed by somebody else, then this is someone who has a much lower risk ability. So you're more risk averse in terms of what it is you would like to put on the line. Whereas we go to the next stage, which is the conventional. So self-employed keeps to conventional products and ideas to meet lifestyle needs. So again, we're taking more of a risk because we become self-employed. However, we're not trying to reinvent the wheel here. We are taking things that exist and trying to do something with it. Now, quite often you'll read that some of the best ideas and best products and services actually come from doing it this way, because actually trying to reinvent the wheel is extremely difficult and maybe unnecessary. But certainly what happens is your market evolves, and it's about trying to find a niche within the new market. So taking things somewhere else. Obviously, if you're somebody like, Dyson, then you can reinvent the wheel and show how you view things differently. If you go over to creative, seek success within limits of personal and professional values. Again, if we look at some of the greatest entrepreneurs, people like Steve Jobs, people like Bill Gates, they'll often tell you that looking at what it is that they have done and how they went about doing it, it was never about money. And as a consequence of what they've done, obviously they've become some of the richest people in the world. But it was never about the money, and actually it was a lot to do with personal success limits and professional values. These are 2 people in particular who left university, who took a risk, a massive risk, by leaving a set educational standard, which was very much foreseen how they would follow things and do things. They took a big risk. But actually what became a big target for them was this idea of personal and professional values. You've got to prove that the risk you took was a really good risk and it was really important, and there's a reason why you did what you did. Opportunist, so spots opportunities and pursues growth to support personal status needs. And again, great entrepreneurs, if you look at the likes of Richard Branson, he's got a very famous story in terms of how Virgin Atlantic came about. And it was because they were away in the Caribbean, they were stranded. So there was an opportunity for him to give somebody a call, get a plane over and start selling tickets to fly Virgin Atlantic. And that's because he spotted an opportunity, and from that he took it somewhere. Serial, constantly challenging assumptions, develops new products and services, growth however defined. So really what we're saying is, we mentioned it previously, looking ahead, challenging assumptions. What is seen as norm and normality for us today will not be normality tomorrow. And it's only that way because somebody has to challenge what it is that we're currently doing. As I mentioned, how we purchase products and services now are very, very different to what we were doing 10, 15 or 20 years ago. It's because we have to challenge this idea of what we're currently doing now and have the foresight to think about where we might be going. So entrepreneurial leaders, so here we've got a list of potential characteristics and traits of what entrepreneurial leaders are. So have great belief in themselves. You can look at somebody like Abraham Lincoln, as we know, one of the most famous presidents of America, and quite famously failed many times over to get into office, but however had great belief in what he was meant to be doing, and arguably one of the greatest presidents in American history. Secondly, so are able to accept calculated risk without anxiety. They analyse and minimise risk when possible. So we mentioned this before in terms of what kind of a risk taker are you? Are you calculated risk? Are you risk averse? Or are you extremely risk taken? And it very much depends on what you have on the line. When you look back at people like Bill Gates. He created his product in the garage. He burnt down the garage, but his risk was quite minimal in terms of that's what he was doing the whole time. He was at his parents' house in his parents' garage. He didn't have a mortgage to pay, anything like that. So for him, he could calculate his risk because he was at home with his parents. For other people, it can be very different. Are exhilarated rather than worried by the unknown or unpredictable. Open to new experiences. Again, if you look at the likes of Steve Jobs, for example, quite famously, he talks in one of his interviews about the fact that if you do not love what it is that you do all day, every day, then you cannot do it. You cannot do it because you have to live and breathe what it is that you're doing. And I think that, you know, on a day-to-day basis, you need to feel that way. I know for me personally, you know, going into the bar business, which was in many ways very precedented, but probably unprecedented as well. I've got family back in the Caribbean who have rum bars or rum shacks is what they are out there. And it was only when I went back about 2 years ago that I kind of got to see it in with a different mindset. And it excited me. And within 15 months, I'd opened up my own bar in the UK. And it still excites me every single day. We're known for our 6 service afternoon tea, and we're known for our craft cocktail range, and developing new cocktails is extremely exciting for me still to this day. Lead enthusiastically and confidently in uncertain or changing situations. I think this is extremely important because your environment is ever changing. It's not going to stop. Okay, the market changes, competition change, everything changes. Someone very recently said to me, you know what, there's a few units up the road, there's talk of them opening up a Wetherspoons pub. How do I feel about that? I have no problems with it at all. I'm ready for it. Firstly, they don't do what it is that I do, so I don't see that as being an issue. But also because I can't be naive enough to think that I won't get competitors and there won't be people who are going to compete with me, especially when they see what it is that we do. The first thing people try to do is copy what you do. And, you know, there's an element of vanity in that, if you'd like to call it. You know, it's quite complimentary when someone tries to copy you, but ultimately they don't really know what it is that you do and how you do it. But it always allows me to step my game up. Enjoy pushing boundaries, exploring and learning. Again, kind of going back to 2 of the greats, your Steve Jobs and your Bill Gates, both of them obviously left higher education to pursue their dreams. But actually, in the end of it, they went back, they got honorary degrees, they have sponsorships for people to go off to university, because no matter what, at the end of it, they focus a lot on the fact that education and learning is still extremely important, regardless of what it is that you're doing and how you're doing it. Even for myself, you know, even just going around London, looking at new bars, looking at new ways that people are doing things, it's so important for me to keep what it is that I do very current and not lose track. Have a hands-on style, drive change to create new value. If you don't have a hands-on style, then the truth is you don't really know what is going on in your business, and that's the ultimate truth. And again, kind of going back to your Steve Jobs and your Bill Gates, you know, there's a lot of literature out there about how hands-on these guys were, to the point where maybe even they were obsessive about it. But there's a reason for that, and that's because they know what it is that they want and they know how to get there, and they're the people who are going to drive it. Are visionary and enjoy dreaming its heart when ideas and new approaches are called for. And again, this comes down to the idea of research and making sure that you fully understand the changing environment that you're in, and you're keeping that way. You're keeping up with what is going on and you're ready for it. are able to persuade others even with little evidence. And I think this kind of goes back to being hands-on, pushing boundaries, and being very, very exhilarated about what it is that you do. When you are extremely enthusiastic about what it is that you do, it absolutely engorges people. Okay, they absolutely feel it from top to toe. Learn as you go. Well, very much what we spoke of before, that you have to learn from every single situation, the good and the bad. And if anything, you probably learn more from the bad situations than the good ones. I know certainly for myself, I've been put into a few challenging places. I opened up a bar, opened up a cocktail lounge, and actually I don't have a background in cocktail making. I don't have a background in working in a bar. I've never worked in a bar before in my life. I don't have a background in the alcohol industry. So, I had a lot of challenges, but I learned every step of the way. I wanted to be very good at what it is that I do before I got other people to do it. And it was immensely important, and that learning hasn't stopped. Have a high need for power and control due to the desire for ownership of problems, programs, and their vision. So again, this kind of goes down to your hands-on approach, that it's extremely important to know your business. And arguably, you could be seen as being very autocratic and very controlling about the kind of business that you have. But there does have to be a balance in terms of, as your business grows, what bits do you let go of and what bits do you keep? Or what bits do you specialize and let go of? So entrepreneurship, I touched on this a little bit before, and it's a relatively new word, and it's a very interesting concept. The idea of entrepreneurship is entrepreneurship within an existing organization, referring to emergent behavior, intentions and behaviors of an organization that is related to departures from the customary. So really what we're saying here is this. This is where big organizations, Deloitte, PricewaterhouseCoopers being two of the biggest ones, are taking on people who have the entrepreneurship characteristics, people who want to produce their own products and services. And what they're doing is they're offering them a framework in which they can do it in. So the idea being that they would have total creativity, they would have access to multiple resources. Somebody like PwC, PricewaterhouseCoopers, has an immense amount of resources to them. And the idea would be that you would create this part of the business, this project, whatever it is, using all the entrepreneurial traits, but actually someone like PwC will own that business in the end. But it's about how you go about developing it. And it's become a really big thing. Many organizations, Virgin Atlantic being one of them, Microsoft are very known for it, buying in organizations, small organizations, where it would be, a one-man band or just 5 people who are working together to create this new product or service in a very entrepreneurial way. They would buy their business, let them continue to develop, but at the end of it, someone like Microsoft will ultimately own the product in the end. So obviously there are some disadvantages because you can't do what it is that you can do. In some cases, there are a share system where they own X amount of shares and you own X amount of shares. So there's lots of ways in which they can partner up. But really the idea behind it is this entrepreneurial characteristic, entrepreneurial attitude towards how to build a business, but you do it inside the parameters of a big organization with lots of money, lots of resources. So supporting entrepreneurship is extremely important because, again, it goes down to that factor that we touched on before with regards to risk. So there's quite a few things that you can see here that are really important. And I think for me, one of the key highlights would be looking at things like the mentoring side. Mentoring is extremely important, and I know for myself, I found mentoring immensely important, and going to a lot of networking events, meeting people. I myself have met the guy who owns Cobra Beer, Lord Karen, and he's been a great support in terms of being able to give advice in regards to the food and beverage industry. As I said, something that I personally didn't have a huge amount of experience in myself. And I think that this is mentoring for me is probably extremely important when you look at this idea of why entrepreneurship is so important and how we can support that. Other factors, as you can see here, definitely this idea of recognizing innovation and success and getting the right people in. Steve Jobs has mentioned this before himself when he said that actually, you know what, you need to get good people in, specialists in, people who know what it is that they do. And he was quite famously asked, you know, do you have the final word? And he said no, because what's the point in getting good people in if at the end of the day I get the final word? What's the point in having people with such a good skill set? And again, we've got the other parameters that go with that in terms of allowing team members to work, to use 10 to 15% time working on their own individual projects as well as working for the business in other ways as well. So, entrepreneurial mindset. So, just a few key features here. What are your goals? What motivates you? What are your personal values? What are your top strengths? How do you cope with adversity and failure? And how well do you cope with uncertainty? These things are absolutely immense, and you need to just make sure that you know what it is that you do and how you do it, and you have real true belief in that. What motivates you? What are your goals? Bill Gates very famously said that the vision, going back to being a visionary, the vision of Microsoft was that every person in the world would have access to their products and services. That still doesn't exist. Not every person in the world has this access, but that was the vision of this particular entrepreneur, which he's still working towards. As a company, that ethos hasn't changed. Know your strengths, know what it is you're very good at, because the things that you are not so good at, you find people who have those as their strengths. You need to find that partnership and that balance with good people around you. How you cope in adversity. Myself personally, I've had quite a few challenges in the business that I have, and to be honest, I look at every single challenge as a real opportunity to lift myself to another level. Every time I get something come up, some new challenge to do with licensing laws or premises license and things like that, I just see it as an opportunity for me to take my business somewhere else, somewhere that I never necessarily thought that I would personally be taking it. Guys, thank you very much. I hope you've enjoyed that.
Thanks very much, Noreen. And we've got quite a few questions coming in. Early on in the presentation, you talked about people who had self-employment almost thrust upon them. What is your advice for these reluctant entrepreneurs?
I think that, again, it's about managing risk, and you've really got to look at your current lifestyle and determine whether you're willing to take those sorts of risks, or maybe partner up with somebody. I know for myself personally, you know, I have this cocktail bar, but I don't do it on my own. I do have a partner who happens to be my husband. We do it together. We have to work out our own risk in terms of one of us needs to be there all the time, but the other person still needs to have a secondary income, and that would be myself. When we evaluated it, it would be better for him to be there and for me to still do the work that it is that I do, because that was a risk factor for us that we had to take into account. So I think that any sort of kind of self-employment that you have to deal with potentially because of the career you want to go down it's all about calculating risk and hopefully sharing that risk if you can.
You've talked about the importance of obviously having support and in your case a partner. Do you think there's a single personality trait that you would say, yes, this is what it needs to be enterprising, entrepreneurial?
Yes, I think positivity. I didn't mention one great entrepreneur for me that I actually quite I look up to a lot, and that is Arnold Schwarzenegger, quite surprisingly. He's a very, very successful man, and he talks about his 6 rules of entrepreneurship. And one of the ones that is the most important is, he says, you know, don't listen to the naysayers. So in other words, stay positive, surround yourself by very positive people, and don't listen to the people who say that you can't. And that is extremely important, because the minute that sort of thing gets into your head, you do start to doubt yourself and you start to doubt everything. You've got to surround yourself by this idea of positivity and the fact that it can be done. And the one thing for me personally, it's a hashtag that I use a lot, is no limits. Because for me, I just think, well, if other people can do it, why can't I? Why can't I do it? There should be no reason why I can't do it just because someone else did it. So my whole thing is always hashtag no limits. I think surround yourself by positivity.
That's a really sort of inspirational way to go around living, really, never mind just in running your own business.
Yeah, definitely.
Can you think of anyone that perhaps has witnessed you or that you've mentored or influenced that you've been able to pass on the positivity to?
Yes, I'd say more within kind of my other career in terms of being a lecturer. I've got three really great students who I keep in contact with who've all chosen to go into human resource management as a career based on having me as their lecturer for 3 years. And that has been, absolutely immense for me. I mean, there's probably no bigger recognition than that, but they have, I still keep in touch with them. They've always said that to me, that if it wasn't for me and the teachings that we did for the 3 years, that they wouldn't have gone into doing human resource management as a job.
And talking about sort of business success, do you think that some companies are destined to failure and others to succeed? Or is it a combination of internal and external factors? Or is it all down to the sort of drive and personality of the entrepreneur?
I'm going to say I think it's down to the drive of the entrepreneur, and that's purely because that, we have very limited control about what happens internally and externally, but what we have control over is what we do about it. So I've mentioned before, I went into an industry that I don't have a huge amount of experience in, and we got thrown absolutely everything at us, but it was about how we were going to deal with it. Now, another person may have chosen to just give up at the first hurdle, whereas for us as a business and for myself, I just wasn't going to have that. That wasn't going to happen. So I think that the entrepreneur is massively important in that whole picture, because internal and external things change all the time. It's just about you and what you choose to do with it. And as I mentioned before, I think there's an opportunity in absolutely everything. No matter how bad this situation is, there is a silver lining. There is something there that you can take to it and do something else with.
You've mentioned your own business, the Fate Lounge. If you had no business at all and you were going to start one tomorrow, what would it be?
Wow, that's a great question. I think that if I had more money, I would probably like to open up a nightclub, which isn't hugely off of what I kind of currently do, but it's a very different audience. And the reason being is because I think that it's a dying trade out there. Lots of London nightclubs have closed down. Iconic nightclubs have closed down. And if anything, I think people have more money than they've ever had before. I think that I would target a certain demographic, probably mid-20s to 30s. I don't think that they have a place to go to past kind of 12 o'clock. And so I personally, would, if I had more funds, I would definitely want to open up a nightclub.
Have a question here about robots. How far off is it before you don't need any bar staff in your Fate Lounge and you're just having robots to serve your customers?
For what we do, that would probably never happen. And the reason is because there's a real personal service every single time you come and order a cocktail. So if you were to go up there and you were to say, you want a particular cocktail, we're going to talk to you about that. So we're going to say, okay, why is that your favorite cocktail? This is the ingredients we use. We're going to show you how we do it. We make it in front of you. So we've got mixologists that do it. And then the presentation and serving of it is all part of an experience. And I've always felt that for us, cocktails aren't cheap. They never have been. But you're paying for an experience as well as a product. And I think that's so important. And when you've got robots will never give you the experience that you want. They won't give you the interaction either.
Well, that's obviously very good news for your staff. So thank you very much. We've run out of time now. Really do appreciate you talking to us this afternoon and giving us great insights. I think we'll all remember positivity as being the key to success.
Thank you.